Did you know that in a world without modern retirement homes or social security, families from the year 500 to 1500 found remarkably diverse ways to care for their elders? What happened when a parent became too frail to work the fields? How did a family survive if their matriarch outlived her husband and many children? Number 5. The enduring multi-generational hearth. Co-residence as the cornerstone of care. The small cottage in the village of Oakhaven was a symphony of daily life, a constant hum of activity that revolved around the central hearth. Smoke curled from the opening in the roof, mingling with the scent of simmering potage and the earthy smell of damp straw. Old Alara, her facer rhodat, of wrinkles carved by sun and wind, sat on a low stool by the fire, her gnarled fingers still nimble enough to mend a torn tunic, though her eyesight was fading. A cloudy haze across her world. Her son Thomas and his wife Agnes oversaw the farm, the sprawling fields of barley, the small patch of beans, and the few sheep that grazed near the muddy lane. Alara at once managed all of this, her back strong, her voice clear across the muddy yard, directing children and livestock with equal measure. Now her steps were slower, a shuffle more than a stride, and her breath shallower, catching sometimes in her chest with a dry cough. Yet she was not idle. She stirred the stew pot, her nose keenly discerning the blend of herbs and vegetables, a skill honed over decades. She watched the youngest children, tiny William and squirming Mary, a quiet sentinel against mischief, her gentle hum, a constant presence in the smoky dwelling. When the nights grew long and the biting cold of winter seeped through the cracks in the wattle and daub walls, she would share stories of her own youth, tales of harvests past and winters weathered, of long-forgotten neighbors and village celebration. Thomas listened sometimes with a tired nod after a long day in the fields, sometimes with a smile when a particularly amusing anecdote surfaced. Agnes brought her a warm bowl of gruel at dusk, ensuring she had eaten her fill before the family settled down for the night. The small cottage already crowded with the living made room for her. Her straw mattress tucked into a corner near the comforting warmth of the fire. The shared space, the shared food, the shared burdens of the day all folded around Alara, a familiar comfort. This was the most common form of care. A simple continuation of life within the family unit. In the bustling market town of Newbury, Master Carpenter Bartholomew shared his timber-framed house with his wife, Eleanor, their 3 adult sons, and their families, including Bartholomew's own aging mother. Matilda, a widow for nearly 2 decades, had seen many seasons of change. Her hands, once strong from countless hours of weaving and spinning, now trembled slightly, making intricate tasks difficult. However, her mind remained sharp, a repository of knowledge about the town, its families, and its history. She knew the best places to find quality wool, the most honest merchants, and the subtle shifts in the market's pulse. While Bartholomew oversaw the apprentices in the workshop below, crafting sturdy furniture and intricate carvings, Matilda would often sit in the main living area, her presence a quiet anchor. She would offer advice on the seasoning of wood, recalling her late husband's precise methods, or suggest a particular herb for a cough, remembering remedies passed down through generations. Her daughter-in-law, Martha, Bartholomew's wife, consulted Matilda on matters of household management, from preserving fruits to preparing feasts for special occasions. Matilda's small garden plot, though tended mostly by Martha and the grandchildren, now was her pride, and she would supervise the planting of herbs, her voice a steady murmur of instructions. She had a small pension, a modest sum derived from a few rented properties her husband had owned, which she contributed to the household, ensuring her continued value beyond her wisdom. This was not a charity arrangement. It was a continuation of the family economy, a mutual reliance. Her eldest grandson, young Thomas, a budding apprentice, would often seek her counsel on matters of the heart or disputes with fellow apprentices, trusting her calm judgment. The home offered security, companionship, and a sense of belonging, a living testament to the enduring bonds of family, a pattern noted in the surviving manorial rolls from regions like Wiltshire during the 13th century. Life for a noble household presented a different scale but the same fundamental principle. Lady Eleanor, Dowager Countess of Devon, resided within the sprawling castle walls, not in her own separate keep, but within the sprawling apartments of her eldest son, Lord Richard. Her chambers were grand, adorned with tapestries depicting ancient hunts and crusades. But they were not isolated. Her days were structured around the rhythm of the castle. She dined at the high table with her son, his wife, and their children, her presence lending an air of tradition and gravitas to the proceedings. While Lord Richard managed the vast estates, overseeing tenants, knights, and the complex machinery of feudal governance, Lady Eleanor remained a vital figure. She instructed her granddaughters in needlework, in the intricate rules of courtly etiquette, and in the family's long and storied lineage. She received petitions from tenants, listened to their grievances, and sometimes offered her gentle counsel to her son on matters of justice and mercy. Drawing on decades of experience managing a large household and dealing with feudal obligation, her chamberlain and a retinue of servants saw to her personal needs, but her connection to the core family remained unbroken. She received her dower income, a substantial portion of the family lands, which allowed her to maintain her own establishment within the castle and contribute to its grandeur, paying for some of her own retinue and even making. The castle chroniclers of the period, such as those detailing the lives of the great families in the north of England, often described the dowager ladies, not as guests, but as integral, respected members of the ruling household, their wisdom and connections proving invaluable in times of political maneuvering or social crisis. Sometimes the transition to elderhood within the household brought challenges. In a small village of Greendale, old Peter, a former blacksmith, suffered from a persistent cough that racked his body and weakened him considerably. His son John now ran the forge, the clang of hammer on anvil echoing through the village as it had for generations. John's wife, Sarah, tended to Peter, bringing him warmed broth, helping him to his feet when his legs gave out, and changing his sweat-soaked linens. The confined space of their small dwelling meant that Peter's illness and his sometimes grumpy disposition affected everyone. Yet Sarah never complained aloud. She had seen her own grandmother cared for in a similar way, a duty simply understood as part of the family compact. The children, at first wary of their grandfather's illness, learned to move quietly around his bed, sometimes bringing him drawings or wildflowers. The family relied on each other, a web of support where each member played a role, however diminished. However challenging the challenges were part of the fabric of daily life. The occasional visit from the village priest or a wise woman who offered herbal remedies provided some comfort. The community's unwritten code dictated that families looked after their own. A stark reality in a world without formal public assistance. The support was not always perfect, not always without tension, but it was consistent, born out of necessity and a deep-seated tradition of reciprocal care, a pattern observable in countless medieval wills and land transfers that speak of continuing residence as a primary obligation. Number 4. Binding vows and formal pacts, written agreements for elder support. In the rich agricultural lands of Bavaria, where meticulous records were kept by local monasteries and manorial lords, a particular kind of agreement frequently appeared in the parchment registers. This was the Leibgedinge, a contract of sustenance, a formal pact that spelled out in precise detail the care an aging parent would receive from their children in exchange for the transfer of land or property. Consider the case of Heinrich, a stout farmer from the village of Grunwald, who in the year 1342 decided to transfer his substantial farm, including its fields, meadows, and oxen, to his eldest son, Klaus A. Heinrich was 65 years old, his back aching from decades of toil, his hands stiff with arthritis. He was not yet incapacitated, but he wished to ensure his remaining years were comfortable, and that the farm continued to thrive under younger, stronger hands. The agreement, meticulously penned by the village scribe and witnessed by the local priest and two prominent villagers, laid out Heinrich's provisions. Klaus was obligated to provide Heinrich and his wife Greta with a specific measure of grain each year, 10 bushels of wheat, 6 of rye, and 4 of oats, to be delivered after each harvest. They were also to receive 2 pigs slaughtered annually, a certain number of chickens, and all the milk they desired from the family cow. A designated portion of the garden was set aside for their exclusive use, to grow vegetables and herbs. Furthermore, the contract stipulated that Heinrich and Greta would retain the use of their current room in the farmhouse, heated in winter with a cartload of firewood, to be supplied by Klaus. If they fell ill, Klaus was to provide for their care, calling upon the local healer if needed, and ensuring they received adequate food and comfort. The agreement also specified the clothes they would receive: new wool tunics and cloaks every 2 years, and good leather shoes annually. Heinrich's plow and his favorite tools, though no longer used, were also mentioned, perhaps as a symbol of his lingering connection to the land. The contract was not merely a list of obligations, it was a legally binding document. Should Klaus fail to uphold his end of the bargain, Heinrich had the right to appeal to the manorial court, or even the church authorities, to reclaim the farm or enforce the terms. Such cases, while sometimes contentious, often saw the communities siding with the aggrieved elder, upholding the principle that children must honor their commitments, a sentiment reflected in numerous court records from the Rhineland region throughout the later Middle Ages. A similar system, often referred to as alimenta in areas influenced by Roman law, existed across southern Europe. In the sun-drenched region of Tuscany, widow Sophia, a weaver by trade, made an agreement with her only surviving son, Marco, a prosperous merchant in the city of Siena. In 1410, Sophia, frail and her eyesight dimmed by years of close work, transferred her small but valuable house within the city walls to Marco. In return, the formal document, drafted by a notary and signed in the presence of witnesses, guaranteed Sophia a comfortable life. Marco committed to providing her with a monthly allowance of silver florins, enough to purchase her own food, wine, and other necessities. He also promised her the use of 2 specific rooms in the house facing the quiet courtyard where she could continue to receive visitors and enjoy the sunlight. The agreement stipulated that a servant paid for by Marco would attend to her needs, assist with her dressing, and ensure her rooms were cleaned. Medical care, if required, would also be covered by Marco, a significant provision given the cost of physicians. Furthermore, Sophia was guaranteed a new winter cloak and 2 new gowns each year, ensuring she remained properly clothed. This formal agreement provided Sophia with a level of independence, while securing her care, ensuring she was not a burden, but a recipient of a structured, legally enforceable commitment. The records of the Florentine guilds and notarial archives from the 14th and 15th centuries frequently contained such detailed alimenta contracts, showing a sophisticated approach to elder care among the urban middle classes, where property rather than just land. Sometimes these agreements arose out of a sense of duty, but sometimes they were a resolution to potential disputes. Consider the family of the miller Guillaume in Picardy, France, in the year 1280. Guillaume had 3 sons, all grown, but only the youngest. Pierre had shown a keen interest in mastering the complex machinery of the mill. When Guillaume decided to retire, he divided his modest landholdings amongst all 3 sons, but the mill itself and the substantial income it generated went to Pierre. To ensure his elder sons, Robert and Louis, did not feel slighted, and to secure his own future, Guillaume stipulated in a formal contract recorded by the local bailiff that Pierre would provide a specified share of the mill's grain output to his parents for the rest of their lives. This share, detailed as a precise number of sacks of flour and bushels of oats per month, ensured that Guillaume and his wife, Marie, would always have ample provisions. It also included the provision of a small cottage adjacent to the mill, where they could live quietly. Overseeing the mill's operation without the heavy physical labor, the contract also mentioned the supply of fresh water and fuel for heating, as well as the provision of a new set of clothes every 2 years. Such detailed contracts avoided potential family quarrels over inheritance and cemented the responsibilities of the heir, creating a clear framework for elder care, a practice documented in many French regional, customary laws of the period. Disputes could and did arise even with formal agreements. In the village of Thorley, England, in the late 14th century, a widow named Edith had transferred her small holding to her son, John, with the agreement that he would provide her with sufficient food, drink, clothing, and lodging. The manor court rolls recorded a complaint from Edith that John had failed to provide her with adequate food, alleging he was giving her scraps and denying her access to the hearth. John, in his defense, claimed his crops had failed, and he had little to spare. The court, after hearing testimony from neighbors, ruled in Edith's favor, ordering John to provide a precise quantity of bread, ale, and meat each week, and to ensure her fire was adequately stoked. The threat of losing his holding or facing fines usually brought sons like John back into line. These formal documents, while not always perfectly enforced, served as a crucial safety net for the elderly, transforming the informal expectation of family care into a legally binding obligation, a testament to the community's desire for order and the protection of its vulnerable members, as seen in the extant records of manorial courts across England. These binding vows provided a sense of security that simple reliance on good intentions sometimes could not. Number 3, the widow's portion, dower rights and sustaining the elder. Matriarch. When Sir Godfrey of Ashworth fell in battle during the 100 Years' War, in 1378, his sudden death left his wife, Lady Margaret, a widow. While her grief was profound, the immediate concern for her future, and indeed for the future of her children, revolved around the concept of dower. Dower was not a gift from her husband. It was a customary right, a legal entitlement, typically to 1/3 of her deceased husband's lands, which she would hold for the remainder of her life. This was her widow's portion, designed to ensure her economic security and maintain her status. For Lady Margaret, this meant that 1/3 of the sprawling Ashworth estate, including specific manors and their revenues, was set aside for her use. Her eldest son, young Sir Thomas, now the rightful heir, took control of the remaining 2/3 of the estate. Lady Margaret received the rents from her dower lands, the produce from its fields, and the services of its tenants. This income allowed her to maintain her own household, including a small retinue of servants, and to live with dignity befitting her station. She often resided in a smaller manor house on one of her dower lands, or sometimes she might continue to live within the main castle, occupying specific chambers, but supported by her own income. The Domesday Book, compiled centuries earlier, already showed the importance of such provisions, and later records, like the Inquisition's post-mortem from the 14th century, meticulously detailed the lands set aside for widows, demonstrating the wise trait. The dower was a cornerstone of medieval women's economic independence, particularly for those of the landed gentry and nobility. Consider the case of Agnes, a peasant woman in the village of Sutton in the early 13th century. When her husband, a villain named William, died, the local custom of the manor ensured that Agnes received a dower. While not measured in vast acres, her dower often consisted of the use of a portion of their small holding, perhaps a specific strip of land in the common fields, or the continued use of their cottage and a share of the garden plot. She might also receive a portion of the livestock, such as a cow or a few sheep, for her lifetime. The heir, typically her eldest son, would manage the larger part of the holding, but he was obligated to allow her to cultivate her dower portion and draw sustenance from it. This meant Agnes, though a widow, was not immediately destitute or entirely dependent on her children's charity. She could continue to work her small plot, sell any surplus produce at the market, and contribute to the village economy. Manorial court rolls, such as those from the Abbey of St. Albans, frequently record cases where widows asserted their dower rights against sons or other relatives who attempted to deny them, showing that these rights were not merely theoretical, but actively defended and enforced. It prevented a widow from becoming a burden on her children, who might already be struggling to support their own families. It also prevented the total fragmentation of the family estate, as the dower lands would eventually revert to the primary heir upon the widow's death. For the widow, it provided a degree of agency and autonomy. She could, within limits, manage her own affairs, make decisions about her dower lands, and even contract with tenants or laborers. Lady Juliana, a wealthy widow in London in the 1440s, used her dower income from properties in the city to fund a small chantry ensuring prayers were said for her late husband's soul, and also to provide charitable donations to the poor. Of her parish, her dower allowed her to maintain an active role in her community and to secure her own spiritual welfare, independent of her son's financial decisions. The testamentary records of wealthy London citizens from this period frequently show widows managing considerable dower assets, a testament to their financial capabilities and the legal framework that empowered them. Despite its importance, dower could also be a source of tension. Disputes sometimes arose between the heir and the dowager over the specific lands assigned as dower, or over the revenue derived from them. The heir might try to extract more from the dower lands or neglect their upkeep, thereby diminishing the widow's income. Conversely, a strong-willed widow might try to hold onto her dower more tightly, sometimes leading to quarrels with her children or other relatives, eager to consolidate the family's assets. In the court records of medieval families, stories emerge of daughters-in-law resenting the older matriarch's continued presence and its sole over a portion of the family wealth, and of sons feeling burdened by the need to support their widowed mothers. Even if the support came from desolated dower lands, however, the legal system generally favored the widow. The community and the courts that served it understood the vulnerability of women without male protection and upheld the dower as a crucial safeguard. A widow's dower rights were generally considered paramount even over the claims of her husband's creditors. This meant that even if a husband died in debt, the widow's dower portion was often protected, ensuring she would not be left penniless. This was a powerful legal protection that offered a lifeline to countless medieval women, ensuring their survival and dignity in their later years, a form of family care that was enshrined in law and custom. Number 2. Passing the plow and the purse. Inheritance with obligations for parental well-being. In the rolling hills of Normandy, the farm of Jean-Luc had sustained his family for generations. By the year 1250, Jean-Luc, though still hale, felt the weight of age creeping into his bones. His son Philippe was now a strong man, capable of managing the arduous demands of the farm. The decision was made to pass on the main responsibility, the plow, the land, and the herds, to Philippe. This act of inheritance was not simply a transfer of property. It came with unwritten yet deeply understood obligations for Jean-Luc and his wife, Marie, while Philippe became the de facto head of the household, and the primary farmer, Jean-Luc, retained a specific portion of the farm's produce. This was not a formal contract like the Leibgedinge of Bavaria, but a customary arrangement. Each harvest a certain measure of grain was set aside for Jean-Luc and Marie, enough to feed them comfortably. They received a share of the cheese made from the cow's milk and firewood cut by Philippe's sons. They continued to live in a corner of the farmhouse, their small sleeping area separated by a curtain. Jean-Luc, though no longer plowing, still walked the fields, offering advice on crop rotation and the health of the soil, his long experience a living encyclopedia for his son. Marie continued to mend clothes, shell beans, and look after the youngest grandchildren. The handing over of the farm was their form of retirement, a stepping back from the heaviest labor while still remaining an integral part of the economic unit. The obligation was embedded in the act of inheritance, a social contract that ensured the aging parents were supported in return for the transfer of their life's work. The coutumes de Normandie, the regional customary laws, often describes such implicit understandings, emphasizing that the heir took on not just assets, but also the family's burdens and responsibilities. In the bustling city of Bruges, in the early 15th century, the master weaver Peter decided it was time to pass his workshop to his eldest son, Hendrik. Peter had built the business from scratch, a testament to his skill and diligence. The workshop, with its intricate looms, bales of fine wool, and established network of buyers, was a valuable asset. The transfer of the workshop meant Hendrik now bore the primary responsibility for its operation and its future. However, the agreement, customary rather than written, involved a crucial provision for Peter and his wife Clara. They would receive a set amount of profit from the workshop, each quarter enough to live comfortably in their small house above the shop. This was their purse, an ongoing income stream from the business they had built. Peter continued to visit the workshop daily, his discerning eye still capable of spotting a flaw in a weave or a knot in a thread. He provided guidance to Hendrik on dealing with suppliers, on managing apprentices, and on the delicate art of negotiation with merchants. Clara continued to manage the household finances, meticulously recording the income from Hendrik's payments and ensuring their household was well run. This form of inheritance with obligation was common among artisans and merchants, where the passing of a skilled trade or business, implicitly or explicitly, included a commitment to support the retired parents, a system reflected in the guild regulations and commercial records of cities like Ghent and Ypres. Among the English gentry, the concept of a jointure was often used in marriage settlements, providing for the future support of a wife who might become a widow, and in some cases for the parents of the husband. While distinct from dower, a jointure was a specific property or income settled upon a woman at the time of her marriage, in lieu of dower, to ensure her provision. Sometimes these settlements included provisions for the husband's parents, as well ensuring their maintenance through the income generated by the land. Sir Edmund, a knight in Kent in the late 14th century, upon marrying his son and heir, Richard declared that the marriage settlement included a clause that obligated Richard to provide for Sir Edmund and his wife, Lady Catherine, by setting aside a specific manner to generate income for them in their later years. Sir Edmund effectively retired from the direct management of his vast estates, passing control to Richard, but retained a significant income stream from this designated property, a practice well documented in wills and land deeds from the period. This allowed him to maintain his status, his household, and his independence without being a direct burden on his son's newly acquired estate. The passing of inheritance, whether it was land, a trade, or a position, was a pivotal moment in the life cycle of a medieval family. It represented a generational shift, a recognition of the elders, while still valued, were stepping back from the most strenuous aspects of their lives. For the younger generation, it was a heavy responsibility, but also an affirmation of their coming of age and their new role as head of the family. The obligation to care for the parents was not merely an act of kindness. It was often a prerequisite for receiving the inheritance itself. If a child failed to provide for their parents, they risked disinheritance, social ostracism, or legal action. The concept of reversio ad parentes, the return of property to the parents if the child failed in their duties, served as a powerful deterrent against neglect. This customary and sometimes legally enforced system ensured that the transfer of wealth and responsibility from one generation to the next was accompanied by a clear understanding of the reciprocal duties involved, guaranteeing that the plow and the purse would continue to provide for those who had once wielded them. Number 1. Beyond the burden, reciprocal contributions and the valued elder. Old Maud, her hair a wispy white halo, sat near the hearth in the tiny dwelling of her son John, in the village of Little Stoke in the early 13th century. Her hands, though gnarled with age, still held the delicate dexterity required for spinning wool into fine thread, while her daughter-in-law, Elspeth, managed the heavy tasks of farming and household chores. Maud's contribution was subtle but essential. She taught the youngest children, especially her granddaughter Alice, the intricate art of spinning her fingers, guiding Alice's clumsy efforts, transforming raw wool into a continuous strand. This skill was vital for the family, as the spun thread would then be woven into cloth for tunics, cloaks, and blankets, ensuring the family was clothed and warm through the biting winters. Maud also acted as the family's memory, a living chronicle of events, lineage, and local lore. When disputes arose between John and a neighbor over a shared boundary, Maud would recall the details of past agreements, her memory clearer than any written record, helping to resolve the quarrel peacefully. She told stories of their ancestors, instilling a sense of history and identity in the young ones. Her presence was a comforting anchor, a source of wisdom and continuity. She was not a burden, but a repository of invaluable knowledge and a quiet, consistent contributor to the family's well-being. An irreplaceable part of the household fabric, a dynamic often understated in historical accounts, but vividly present in family structures. In a thriving urban center, like Paris, in the 14th century, Master Baker, Louis, a venerable figure in his guild, had passed on his highly successful bakery to his son, Antoine. Louis, though retired from the daily grind of kneading dough and stoking ovens, continued to provide immense value. He spent his mornings sitting in the back of the shop, observing the apprentices, occasionally offering a sharp, sec critique of a poorly formed loaf, or an oven that was not quite at the right temperature. His experienced palate could discern the slightest imperfection in the yeast or the quality of the flour. Antoine, despite being the master, still sought his father's counsel on bulk purchases of grain, or the introduction of new recipes for spiced cakes. Louis also served as an informal arbiter for minor disputes that sometimes arose between apprentices or journeymen, his calm authority often diffusing tensions before they escalated. Furthermore, Louis often represented the family at guild meetings, his long-standing reputation and network of connections proving invaluable for the bakery's continued prosperity. He brought news from the city, insights into trade regulations, and sometimes lucrative new contracts. His contributions were not physical labor, but rather intellectual capital, experience, and social connections, ensuring his continued respect and active role within the family enterprise, a pattern reflected in the careful maintenance of guild membership lists and family records. For the noble family of the de Courtenays in Burgundy, the aged matriarch, Lady Isabel, was a formidable presence. Though her days of managing the vast estates were long past, she remained a central figure of influence and wisdom. She received visitors from neighboring lordships, her sharp political mind still capable of discerning alliances and threats. Her advice to her son, Lord Henri, on matters of marriage negotiations for his children or the complex feudal obligations owed to the Duke was highly prized. She taught her granddaughters the intricate art of illuminated manuscripts and the complex genealogies of allied families, ensuring they understood their place in the intricate web of aristocratic society. During feasts, she presided with dignity, her stories of past crusades and royal courts captivating young and old alike. Her contributions were in the realm of social capital, cultural transmission, and political insight, maintaining the family's prestige and connections. Her experience was seen as a profound asset, not merely a charming reminiscence. She was not passive recipient of care, but an active participant in the family's standing and future, a role often highlighted in medieval chronicles and family histories. The concept of reciprocal contributions extended to the very young. Grandparents, especially grandmothers, were often primary caregivers for young children, freeing the able-bodied parents for more strenuous labor in the fields or workshops. In many peasant households, a grandmother would watch over the infants and toddlers, telling them stories, teaching them simple songs, and guiding their first steps. Her presence provided a continuity of care and instruction that was essential for the family's survival. This role was particularly important in times of high infant mortality and frequent childbirth, where the experience of older women was crucial. An aging grandfather, no longer able to plow, might sit by the fire mending tools, sharpening knives, or weaving baskets, his presence a quiet source of practical knowledge and ongoing contribution. The wisdom accumulated over a lifetime was shared not just in stories, but in practical skills, ensuring the survival and prosperity of the family unit. The elders were seen as keepers of the past, linking the present generation to their roots and tradition. Their very existence, their presence in the household affirmed the family's lineage and history. This deep-seated respect for age and the recognition of the elders' continuing value meant that while the physical burdens of care might fall on the younger generation, the elders themselves were far from being mere dependents. They were valued members, respected for their knowledge, their experience, and their ongoing, often subtle contributions to the family's well-being, transcending any notion of being a burden.